Bhaskar Chakravorti is the Dean of Global Business at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, which is in its essence a school of international affairs, but is a very big picture public policy institution. And Bhaskar has been engaged for some time in a pretty massive data analytics operation about how the world is changing coming out of COVID. And he has particularly honed in on the United States for one part of that work and looking at connectivity. I heard him present some of it not long ago, and some of his discoveries are so important. I wanted him to share them with us today. So welcome, Bhaskar. Thanks so much for joining us at the Health and Wealth of America.
Thank you, David. Great to be back and great to see you, and congratulations on a great conference. So I look forward to sharing some of the work that we've been doing, and hopefully this is of interest to each one of us at this conference, because each one of us is connecting into this conference using digital technology. And sadly, not everybody can connect into this conference because not everyone in America is as digitally connected as I'm assuming everybody here is. So my topic for the conversation today is about America's digital divide and how it adds up and why the plan to fix it doesn't and what we can do about it. So let me kick this off with a picture which is taken from a police body cam of a young woman by the name of Darnella Frazier, whose name we may not have heard even a few weeks back, but over the course of the last few weeks and last few days, we know about her. She's a 17-year-old who took a video of George Floyd's excruciating last 9 minutes of life on a street corner of South Minneapolis. And here she is taking that video. And this is a shot that we shall all remember for the rest of our lives. This also points to the power of digital technology in recording history as it happens. And I tracked Darnella to where she lives and to Cup Foods, where she took that picture in a neighborhood in South Minneapolis. And so this is a picture of the state of Minnesota and a bunch of different wonky parameters about the state of Minnesota: broadband usage, smartphone only usage, the proportion of the population that's Hispanic and the proportion of the population that's Black. And here is where Darnella Frazier was located when she was taking that picture of George Floyd dying. It's interesting, of course, we can dive into what the data here is showing, but this red circle points to the fact that this is a neighborhood that is pretty heavily populated with a Black and brown community, with a decent amount of that population only using the smartphone to connect to the internet. And there's a reasonable amount of broadband connectivity in this county, which suggests that there is a middle class and a slightly richer community that has access to digital technology, but a significant chunk of this community, about I'd say 8 to 10% of them, do not have access to a laptop or a computer, which means their children can't really attend school the way they are meant to, because all schools are remote and all the children have is a smartphone in their home. Or you can't get a teleconsult with a doctor in a reliable way because you are on a smartphone. Here's another picture of another person who may not be as famous as Darnella Frazier, but she's been doing some heroic work in Shelby County in Tennessee. Her name is Dr. Alicia Hochschalter, and she is the medical director of the Shelby County Health Department. I looked up the poorest zip code in Shelby County. It is over 70% of that zip code does not have internet access in the home, and over 90% of that zip code is Black. When Shelby County Health Department put out a call for those who met the criteria for getting a vaccine. That call went out from Dr. Hochhalter's office over the internet. And the way you signed up to get a vaccine was over the internet. Over 70% of this poorest zip code did not have the internet at their home. So guess what? Most of the people who lived in the county did not get their vaccine. The vaccine was basically given out to people who came in from other counties, and they knew that there was excess supplies lying around. And most of those people were richer, and most of them were not Black or brown.
Where exactly is that county, Bhaskar?
It's right outside Memphis, Memphis, Tennessee.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so it's close to a part of Tennessee that many of us know. So that's where Shelby County is. This is Governor Jim Justice of West Virginia. Just recently announced an incentive to get smart people to move from places like where I live, Boston or Silicon Valley, to move to places like Morgantown, West Virginia. And he's offering about $10,000 in incentives and another $10,000 in like free equipment and free tickets to outdoor activities to get people to move there and to make Morgantown, West Virginia, the new Silicon Valley, as it were. Well, it turns out that here is a different way to look at the state of West Virginia, which I thought paints an interesting picture of how attractive West Virginia might be, apart from the fact that it's got nice mountains and whitewater rafting. If I'm a remote tech worker and I want to move to a place with mountains and whitewater rafting, I'd also like to have pretty decent internet access. So I have here a picture of the parts of the state that are marked in red, which means internet access is like really, the use of broadband internet is very low in the state. And where it's green, it's higher than the rest of the state, but it's not that high. As it turns out, urban West Virginia, 62% of the urban population in West Virginia does not use broadband internet, and 85% of West Virginia does not, of rural West Virginia does not use broadband internet, which is kind of troublesome if I'm thinking of moving to West Virginia. So I thought another way to sort of think about what could be attractive if I wanted to move to, whether it's West Virginia or Colorado or Idaho, any of the places where a lot of digital nomads are now considering moving, given that so many employers are currently remote and they are promising to remain remote for the foreseeable future, is to ask the question, how good is the infrastructure? How good are the institutions, and institutions that include laws and regulations and government support systems, and how inclusive is internet access? And in addition to that, I want to understand how digitally proficient the population in that state or in that city is. And I would argue that in addition to cost of living, the quality of restaurants, how nice the whitewater rafting is, it is good for us to check out the digital attractiveness of different parts of the country. And indeed, West Virginia, we did an analysis of the infrastructure, inclusivity, institutions, and digital proficiency of the population of West Virginia. And this looks like a really complicated picture. Let me just kind of boil this down to the bottom line. West Virginia doesn't look very good when I compare it across all these different criteria, and the median of the United States is far below the median in practically every parameter. So Governor Justice would have to go much further than putting a $20,000 incentive to get really good, smart remote workers to move there. It turns out that this is a problem that affects many cities and many states that are offering incentives to remote workers to move there. So Kansas, again, it's hard to read, but bottom line is Kansas doesn't do that well on most dimensions. Neither does Maine, neither does Oklahoma. Each of these are offering incentives for people to move. Where are they moving from? Well, they could be moving from the state of California, where there are a lot of tech workers. And we do know that the Bay Area has seen an exodus in the last year of people moving away to other places. It turns out that even the state of California has its red zones. So what I found shocking was that 38% of urban Californians do not use high-speed internet, and 83% of rural Californians do not use high-speed internet, which is a pretty staggering figure. And this is California, the capital of digital technology, not just for the United States, but for the world. And that spike that you see in the middle is actually these heights on this map has to do with population density, and that spike is San Francisco. And one thing that you can take away from this picture is that San Francisco is not the darkest green on this picture. So the city of San Francisco itself is not that broadband savvy as one might expect it to be. So if I were to think about the different parts of the United States that are digitally connected and those that are digitally disconnected and those that are in between, we ended up doing a massive amount of analysis across every state of the country and every county within every state, and we clubbed the 50 states into three different groups. Group one are the states that are performing pretty poorly on every dimension: affordability, access to infrastructure, institutions, and digital proficiency. These include states like Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Iowa, and so on. Then there's group three, which are not necessarily firing on every engine, but they're doing pretty well across all the criteria. And that includes California, Connecticut, Delaware, and shall I say, my own state of Massachusetts. And then there's group two, which is somewhere in between. And they are, strong in some dimensions and not so strong in not so some others. So this is kind of one way to figure out where to move to if you're a remote worker. So if anybody wants the data, please get in touch with me. So America is digitally divided. We knew that, but how digitally divided? I don't think we had a good appreciation how deep and wide the digital divide is. And we need to do something about it. And how do we convert the digital divide into a digital dividend? It turns out that President Biden has a wonderful infrastructure plan that he has recently put out. It's over $2 trillion, which many lawmakers in Congress aren't pleased with. But those of us who think that infrastructure goes beyond potholes and ports, this is great news. Finally, somebody's putting some serious money against it. In terms of digital infrastructure, that's also part of this plan. And President Biden has put $100 billion against fixing the digital divide. And reflecting on all the analysis that I showed you before, is this enough? I'm not so sure. So my concern is that the Biden plan is both too ambitious and it's not ambitious enough. Why is it not ambitious enough? It's because I feel that the Biden plan undercounts the number of people who are digitally disconnected. It probably is based on a count from the FCC that shows 14 million Americans are not connected. It turns out that the number that don't have broadband connectivity is more like 40 million. Those who don't use broadband connectivity is more like 150 million. So
40 million would be those who have access to it if they were to pay for it.
40 million are those who don't have access to it.
Oh, no, right. Don't.
Yeah.
But so the 150 minus 40 is 110 million who could get it, but don't even have the money or whatever to pay for it.
Exactly. So we are talking about half the country that's actually not using the internet at broadband speeds. So how do we approach this? So the Biden plan, and this is where I feel it's overly ambitious. The plan is to provide subsidies and incentives to municipal networks and public networks to close the gap. It turns out that there are 18 states in the country that have legislation and laws that block municipal networks. You're not allowed to put a municipal network in a place where you have the AT&Ts and Comcasts of the world. A state like Pennsylvania does not allow a municipal network. So it's not that easy for the Biden plan to be put in place. And by the way, we all need this plan to do its business. So what do we need? We need a higher budget. The budget needs to be more like $240 billion. Of course, Congress is not eager to sanction $100 billion. So why would we think they would want to sanction $240 billion? Well, maybe there are some other solutions that we could go to. One solution is looking for a new source of tax revenue. And here is an idea. an idea that was first put forward by my former professor, Nobel laureate Paul Romer. He said, tax the digital ad revenues that the social media and search companies are getting. And I say, let's go for it. Let's put a tax on digital ad revenue, use that tax to populate a universal broadband fund, kind of like a universal service fund that we used to have for telecoms. Same problem as telecoms is the public good, natural monopoly. We need to provide incentives to close the gaps in high cost areas. So why not apply that same model here? Of course, that may not close the gap. So why don't we bring in big tech? Why don't we bring in Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, and help ask them to provide a portion of the digital infrastructure at affordable prices. And why would they do that? It turns out each one of them has an access initiative. Facebook has Facebook connectivity, Google has Google Fiber, both Amazon and Apple have satellites in the sky that provide broadband, or they could provide broadband connectivity. And each of these four companies is under a certain amount of pressure, shall we say, from the government. Both Republicans and Democrats would like to rein them in. Perfect moment to bring them into the conversation and get them to offer affordable broadband. And finally, there are opportunities to create public-private partnerships to go to the most vulnerable areas. We just saw a public-private partnership close the gap in a portion in East Cleveland. You could multiply that several times over and create a plan that is coordinated by the central government. So there's a lot more to talk about on this issue. It's a complicated issue. The digital divide is with us. It's deeper and wider than we ever thought it was. It takes money to close the gap. We don't have enough money. We need much more money, but money is not going to be coming from Congress, sadly. So we need to go to other sources. We need to get creative in terms of how we close the gap. We need to do it now, and that's my appeal.
Thank you, Bhaskar. You wouldn't find an audience more receptive to this message. I think this is the most techonomic language you could use. If we don't have a more digitally facile society, we won't be competitive. Interestingly, some of our economist speakers yesterday were talking about the challenges we are going to have going forward, keeping up with China, especially on the global stage, as their economy roars ahead. If we really want to be competitive, this is a key issue, aside from the issues of fairness and equality. So thank you so much, Bhaskar. It makes a lot of sense you're doing this work out of the Fletcher School, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon.
Thank you for having me, David.